Test, test, test. Test, test, test. You ready to shake, rattle, and roll? I can be wherever you want me. Okay. So, what better topic could you have after a long day? 9 o'clock at night. We're looking to, relax, and then we're going to talk taxes. So, the excitement, probably going to struggle a little to make it exciting, but let's see what happens with this. So, I've been doing taxes now. Well, I've done my own forever, but through AARP Tax Aid, I've been doing taxes now since I retired in '09. So I've got a few years under my belt. We don't get into the real complex stuff, but we get into a lot of the straightforward stuff. And believe it or not, the most complicated thing that we train for is all the stuff like, are they a dependent? Do they qualify for earned income credit? Do they? So there's a lot of that stuff that's in there as well. But the first few slides, I'm going to introduce the organization so you have a feel what it is, because if you're not aware of it, most of the people in this room could probably use that service. Where you have your own business and you have some significant income, then it's going to be what we'd call out of scope. But go ahead and move us forward there, Steve, and you'll see that there are various lines. So AARP, everybody knows AARP, but AARP has a nonprofit edge, which is called AARP Foundation. And that's really what tax aid organization comes through. A lot of what we do is funded by the IRS, believe it or not. They recognize the tax code is so complex, people don't have a prayer of getting accurate returns filed without some help. There are also grants that come in from other organizations. AARP Foundation Tax Aid is the largest nonprofit income tax preparation company. In '68, since they started, over 50 million people that we've helped. Again, our focus is the elderly and disadvantaged, low income. Officially, we don't turn anybody away, but we do have guidelines in terms of the complexity of a return. As an example, most may be aware of a 1099-R. That's the form you get if you have some investments, especially once you retire, if you're going to start taking money out of an IRA. When somebody walks in with a dozen of those, we say, you know, we'd rather you went to a paid preparer, because we're here to help the elderly disadvantaged. We're going to spend 2 hours in your return, and we'd rather serve more people. As I said, jointly funded by the foundation and grants. We're in all 50 states. We have what we call split states. In other words, there's some point where the geographic area gets to be too big. So New York State is split up into 4. I think Pennsylvania's in 3. California is split up into 6. There are about 72 split states across the country, and then those are split up into districts. All of the returns are prepared electronically. Almost all of them are e-filed. There are circumstances that come up where you can't e-file it. It may be because of some documentation that needs to go with it. It may be because of some of the other forms that are in the return that require a paper return. If that's the case, we've prepared it electronically. We print it out on paper for the client to mail in themselves. So that's the e-file. It doesn't end up being a restriction. They don't have to leave if we can't e-file it. And here are some of those specifics for last year. So it was tax year 17, so in calendar year 2018. This program has 35,000 volunteers across the country, 5,000 sites, and you can read the rest of it in terms of 1.6 million federal returns, and we helped over 2.5 million people. And I got to tell you, it's very rewarding in terms of being in the program. How many people are just, I was just sharing a moment ago, I had a woman come in Tuesday, and she didn't sleep the night before. She was worried about her taxes. And it was a simple return. It's just that reputation that the IRS has, that they're going to take everything you have, you're not going to be able to talk to anybody, and she was just nervous wanting to get her taxes done. And I can tell you, when there's bad weather, I may not get all my counselors there. I'll tell you, all of the taxpayers show up. They don't want to take a chance of not getting another time slot to get those taxes done, and we do them for free. As I tell people, donuts, chocolate, those are all good things, but we can't accept cash. This is just a quick overview of the technology, of the way the organization is laid out. Not that you really care, but I'm what they call a technology specialist. There's one person in every split state that ends up being the technical guru. I can tell you I know a lot more about the Windows operating system, about networks, routers, repeaters or extenders, now WISP connections, than I ever wanted to, but required to support all of our sites. When the people at those sites get in trouble, I end up getting the phone call or the email to get that all set up. This is really the working level. We have what we saw, someone that's responsible for the local site, making sure the printers work, making sure the computers connect, that they're getting updated, et cetera. When they need help, they give me a call. We have the people preparing the taxes. Many of our sites, if you have any inclination to volunteer and you say, well, I don't really know taxes, I'll tell you what, a very valuable one is the client facilitator. This is someone that doesn't prepare any taxes, but they marshal the traffic. They check off people when they come in to say, yep, they're here for their appointment. They help. Trust me, we have people come in with a bag of paper. It's still in the envelopes. Many cases, the envelopes are never opened. It said tax document. They throw it in a bag and they bring it in. These people help those of us who are preparing taxes save time because they get everything out of the envelopes. They're looking through it to make sure that it's going to be a return that we can do. And so this is the organization that goes from the state level all the way down to the very local that helps support everything that we're going to do. These are the things, you can put them all up there, Steve. These are the things in my role that I'm responsible for. So much of the equipment we use is all from the program. Now, in my case, I do have my own. There are a fair amount of personal equipment used, but for the most part, it's all loaned and owned by the AARP. Therefore, once a year, you got to do an inventory confirmation. So we confirm inventory, order all the consumables in terms of the toner that's going to be needed. We take care of the tax software licenses. Every site, there are some exceptions I won't go into, but for the most part, every site essentially has a site license that is for the tax software, and we order that. That's all paid for by the IRS in terms of that software that we're going to be using. We make sure that all the laptops have virus protection. We do rely on Defender, so for Windows, we rely on their built-in virus protection that's there, and at least to my knowledge, certainly nothing has hit the headlines that said that we've had any problems. We take care of all the technical training, and as I said, throughout the season, it's starting to wind down now. Usually once we start doing the returns, then I can focus on my own sites, because if they haven't solved their issues by now at the other sites, they're not going to. We used to use a program that was called TaxWise. Now we use a program called TaxSlayer. TaxSlayer, TaxSlayer. I wouldn't go out of my way to go get it. Navigation isn't as good as we'd like. They're still struggling with their servers occasionally to keep up with all the volume. But I understood why the IRS made the move. They had been with a company for 10 years, and when they went to renew the contract, basically the company said, you're locked in. All the carry forward data's here. You've worked with us. Your people know us. You can't go anywhere. And they gave them a number of like $600 per site. New company came in at 200. So, you know what? Maybe it's not as quick to use, but 200 versus 600 times all the sites we have, I understand why they made the move.
So you just need the one license for your site.
Right. So for my site, one license. Doesn't matter how many seats. That gets what we call an electronic filing identification number. Yep. Yep. Next one. This, I mentioned before, just wanted to put one up. This is where we get into a lot of fun. And Steve and I were talking a little bit earlier that as various organizations and sites continue to tighten up security, it brings us more headaches. As an example, Steve, you were just saying Square worked fine, and this year you've been having some struggles here.
Well, I just got it working, so and the YouTube streamer is working. So something changed between the beginning of the meeting and now. So I can take their credit card.
So go try to understand exactly what it was that changed, what bit somewhere got toggled somewhere. So many of our sites now, we finally have convinced people to get off of open Wi-Fi. That was what some of them were using, so they would connect all the laptops and their wireless printer to the local open Wi-Fi for printing. This year we made a concerted effort to get away from that. So we go to what is called a WISP router. I never remember what the letters stand for. I thought I'd wait and see.
Wireless ISP?
Must be. So what that means is I take a router, and instead of having that plug into an Ethernet jack, the router actually connects to the local network via wireless. Now this router controls everything we do, so we're behind the firewall of our router. We're behind the encryption on the software. We're not open to the public anymore. So this allows us to be secure in everything we do. For the most part, all of our laptops are Wi-Fi now connecting to it. And for the most part, printers, we either have a network connection for a network printer, or we have a wireless printer that connects wireless. We still have a few out there that are making use of good old USB printers. The one nice thing about them is you connect the cable and they work. Sometimes the network printers, we've pretty much gone to, I think it's been mentioned before, a fixed IP. If you have a wireless printer at home and occasionally you have trouble finding it or it doesn't work well, if you go assign a fixed IP address, so you tell it it's always going to be here, that address hopefully is outside the assignable range of your router, then it's much more reliable because your computer is always going to go there to look for it and the printer is always there. We used to have some sites that, gee, sometimes it worked and sometimes it didn't. Well, the difference was some days they'd come in and they would power up the router and plug in the printer and then everything else would connect. Well, the printer was always at the first IP address the router handed out. So it was always in the same place. If they came in and somebody connected a laptop first, they had trouble. Now, some printers are getting better, but again, it's sort of how do you try to minimize your risk in terms of the trouble you're going to get into as you're setting up the sites. We also have a situation, I actually work in Chilai. Last year, they helped me out. They took me from a nice jack I could plug into to wireless. It's like, no, you didn't help me. That's open wireless. Well, we have a password. Yeah, who do you give it to? Well, everybody that asks. Well, that's not a secure network. Last year, everything worked fine. This year, they went, I'm not getting into the details, but they went to a captured portal. What that meant is, one example of that is, you've been to a number of sites where, yeah, it's open, but when you say connect, they come back and say, you know, are you going to abide by this agreement? And you have to click a box and say yes. Well, if I have a router trying to connect, the router can't go in there and read that and click yes every time. So I was lucky in Chilai, have a good relationship with them. Their IT guy, we worked through, found a way to get my router connected, and we're up and running. But that's what happens in many places as we're going through it.
And related to that was another security breach that hit the news recently. For some reason, there are several 100,000 printers publicly accessible on the internet. So some company set up their printer on their network and decided to make it publicly accessible, or accidentally made it publicly accessible to the internet. So some guy found a list of these printers and printed a page on 70,000 printers, urging them to subscribe to PewDiePie's YouTube channel so he could beat T-Series as the most subscribed YouTube person. They're both about 75, 80 million subscribers. And so he's done this 3 times in the last 2 months. And then at the end of the page he says, and you should probably secure your printer too. So I used to have a printer publicly accessible on the internet, so when I'm at home I can print to the office printer. I decided that's probably
maybe not the best plan.
Not the best idea, yeah. So if you suddenly see something printed on your printer that you didn't print, you might want to check your network configurations. And if you want to subscribe to PewDiePie, I suppose you could do.
So now let's go take a look at what's actually going on with some of the tax stuff. So there was a lot out there in the media. One of the biggest things that I kept hearing over and over was, boy, you're going to make out now because the standard deduction was doubled. That was really publicized. The thing that wasn't publicized was that your $4,000 exemption per person went away. So doubling the standard, for most people, they're going to come out a little bit ahead. But if you were a person that has always itemized, then you're not going to come out ahead. You're actually going to go backwards with this. So if you take a quick look at a few of these numbers, basically this is from 17 to 18. So single went from $6,350 to $12,000. Married, $12,700 to $24,000. And how much do you get for older? As an example, if you're over 65, married filing joint, now it's $24,000 plus the $2,600, or $26,600. Now that sounds pretty good. But if you were someone that between your sales tax, property taxes, maybe some interest, charitable donations, and you had essentially a lot of itemized deductions, for sake of discussion, let's say you had itemized deductions of 24,000. You'd say, well, geez, you're coming out ahead now, it's 26.6. Well, no, that was 24,000 plus, in my case, my wife and I, another 8,000 of exemptions. So we had $30,000 of deductions. Now we have 26.6. So I've seen a few people come through. For many people, it actually come out probably close to a wash. It's not going to be that big a deal for most, but for some, they're getting hit in the negative direction, obviously.
And we're hearing a lot of grumbling around the internet now that people's returns are 8 to 10% lower, and people that have gotten returns for years are now starting to have to pay because of the tax changes.
Well, and there are a couple aspects to that. One of the things, again, obviously the people that are coming into us need help getting their taxes done. So they're not the mathematicians and the math whizzes. There's a lot of this that they really struggle to get their heads around. One of the biggest things people struggle with is they focus on the refund. And I try to get them to focus on that line that says federal taxes. The real thing you want to do is you want to minimize how many taxes you're paying. If you're just looking for a big refund, I know how to fix that. Have more withheld.
Yep.
Now, it's,
Can you declare negative one
what's that?
on your W-2 instead of doing 0? Can you do negative one?
You mean on your W-4?
W-4, yeah.
Yes.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
I did for years when I was working. Yeah.
And then you get an extra
So,
big.
so I know people that did the minus. Actually, I was able to declare more like 12 because I had a lot of deductions in it. But yeah, no, you can declare minus.
Wow.
Or you can tell them to actually withhold an extra dollar amount on your W-4.
Wow.
That's available.
It's a guarantee or a big return.
Yeah. Now, the other part of what Steve mentioned, when people are saying, well, gee, now they're unhappy, they're getting less back on their refund, is the withholding tables were changed with the new tax law. So people were getting more in every paycheck through the year, which meant there was less withheld. So even if they're paying the same amount of taxes, they're getting a lower refund, and now they're unhappy. And as I said, for some it might have tripped them over, and now they're actually having to pay some. But again, it's understanding the difference between what am I paying versus just the refund.
Yeah, do you want to get more every week, every paycheck, or do you want to get a refund at the end of the year?
And one of the things that we're very careful about, we are not financial advisors. So, you know, we try to tread lightly anytime we get near the edge of anything. We're not here to advise people on how to manage their finances. We don't know their situation or anything else behind it. We may at times say, gee, you know, you're getting 8 of these 1099-Rs. You do realize you don't have to take that minimum required distribution from each account. The requirement is that minimum required distribution can all come out of one account if you want. It would make our lives a lot easier because we'd have one form instead of 8. The other thing that we avoid in terms of that refund is some people, I'm sure you've never met anybody like this, but some people aren't necessarily good at saving money. And so if they get more in every paycheck, it gets spent, and then they don't have anything when February, March, and April roll around. But if they deliberately have extra withheld, it becomes like a Christmas club, and they end up with $1,000, $2,000, $3,000 when they file their taxes. And in today's interest rates, it's really not that big a deal. So we do let them know that, you know, in many cases, people will be getting a big refund and they don't owe any taxes at all. So they wouldn't have to have anything withheld. So we'll make sure they're aware of it, but we also point out that's totally their, you know, however they want to manage their own finances. Yeah.
Technically, they're better off with less refund because you get use of your money, not government.
Right, but if it's just going to sit in a savings account at, you know, 0.02% interest, yep. Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. One of the other things that changed, and I did mention it, is you can see how the brackets changed. So as an example, in the previous code, there was a 15% bracket that went up to 38. Instead of 15%, that bracket now is only 12%, and it's up about $1,000 higher to 38.7 versus about 37 even. 25% bracket went from 38 up to 92. Now you got 22 and 24% all the way up to 160. So the brackets did shift. The percentages of taxes came down a little bit. So again, this will help people a little bit depending on where you fall within these many brackets. This one I was stating was for filing a single and then filing jointly or married. Again, and by the way, these, you know, if you go online and search for, you know, bracket shift or anything else, you can find all these numbers online certainly. But so again, it did lower the tax rate. There's no question about that. And it did lower the amount of taxes people need to pay. Part of the reason that if you look at the federal deficit, it's not exactly shrinking. So this is one that if you live in New York State was not at all good to us. It's called SALT, but it's essentially, it's a limitation on your state and local taxes. So between your state income taxes and your property taxes, that's limited now to $10,000 a year. And there are many people that pay property taxes well in excess of that in the Rochester area. And then especially if you're still working and you have income tax, you'd be well above this, and now you can't make use of it because it's limited to 10. One more thing that essentially says, I expect to, we usually do probably, out of 900 returns, we probably did maybe 30 to 40 with itemized deductions last year. I'm guessing it'll be less than 10 this year, especially for federal. Another change that was made, I don't remember if I have it in here or not, but in the past, New York State said if you use a standard deduction in federal, you have to use standard in state. If you use itemized federal, you have to itemize state. And New York has broken that link. So you can take standard federal and still itemize in state if it makes sense for your return. So there's a $10,000 limit. Federal basically did away with the miscellaneous deductions. So the biggie in there for some people is investment expense. That's no longer deductible on federal. So if you have a financial advisor and or you're paying fees for trades or anything else where you used to be able to deduct it, that has gone away. Again, for federal, still deductible for New York State. New York State stayed in the same place they've been. As noted, so the investment fees, moving expenses no longer deductible. Gambling losses, you would be surprised, it's been an education for me, how many of our clients, that's their recreation, is going to Lago Resorts or going to Niagara or a number of different places for gambling. Needless to say, they have a lot of gambling losses, some of them. Those are deductible up to the extent of the winnings. But they're only deductible if you itemize. So people who gamble who in the past their gambling losses probably gave them enough to itemize, they won't use them at all this year. So it's sort of a double whammy. And they have gone back, if you have a home equity loan in the past, that home equity, the interest on that was considered fully deductible if you itemize. Starting this year, I forget now if that's starting this year. Yeah, that started in tax year 2018. That has to be, the funds from that have to be used for your property, to upgrade your property. So it's got to be actually used for the house. You can't take out a home, if you take out a home equity loan and go buy a boat or a new car, then the interest is not considered deductible. It has to be used to improve the property.
Parking a boat in front of your house improves it, doesn't it?
Oh yeah, yeah, ask your neighbors.
Yeah.
And these are some of the additional changes. The 0% capital gains rate for households with taxable income at these, I think that's up a little bit. This is where the 20% kicks in, and then in between this, so for single, between the 38.6 and the 426, I don't know that many of us are probably up there, is 15%. Again, there's no deduction for personal casualty and theft losses except in a presidentially declared disaster area. Again, in the past, if we had an ice storm, and as an example, if I go back to '91, we lost a bunch of trees that lowered the value of our property. That was a loss in terms of property value, and I was able to write that off on taxes. That was a legal thing to do. You can't do that now. Now, I think up along Greece and the shoreline, that was finally declared presidential disaster area. So there are some clients up there that will be able, depending on their losses, to itemize, to use that as a deduction when they itemize.
And it's got to be president, not governor?
I think it's got to be president.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure if Greece got the president or not.
Wow.
Luckily, we don't get many Greece clients. If we do, I'll have to do some research. Probably not a lot of people in here that are worried about the child tax credit. That was increased to $2,000. There's a $500 non-refundable credit for the qualifying dependents. And it does apply to others. That's one of the, probably the biggest thing when I first started doing taxes, as I mentioned earlier, that was the toughest part, was the tax stuff itself was pretty straightforward, but we have an online tool that actually is slick and works very well. We also have a trifold 8.5 by 11 that goes through the logic chart. So you start with, was this your child, or was this in income levels, and you go all the way down through the logic trees, and when you get to here, it says, go to this chart, that go through and determine, are they dependents? What is their age? Are they a full-time student? We run into that once in a while. It's nice that we have a good guide. Again, the training materials we get through ARP Tax Aid are excellent in terms of both the sessions we have and the materials we have to use. So the other big thing was they improved the 1040. I hope you understood my tone. For those of us using it, we think it's a disaster. Basically what they did was, so what I have up here is sort of the party line, right? Obviously, a lot of tax changes this year, and allegedly Treasury asked the IRS to look at ways to improve the 1040. Now, when somebody was campaigning, they talked about getting the 1040 on a postcard. I tend to believe that played into this a little bit, of quote-unquote getting it down to a postcard. What they call simplification, in the past, if you had an easy return, you might just use a 1040 EZ or a 1040A that was just a few lines, bing, and you're done. Well, they said that was too complicated for people to decide what form to use. So now everybody uses the same one, the 1040. Their new approach now is, number one, you could actually put it on essentially a half sheet double-sided. You're probably not going to put it in the mail with your Social Security number on it. So it does fit on one side of a page, and I have a shot of what that looks like here in a moment. But now, instead of having a 1040, there's a 1040 with 6 schedules. Yes, 6 schedules. So depending on your tax situation, instead of 2 pieces of paper, meaning the 1040 double-sided, now you may have 8. So far, we haven't run into the schedules too much. I've been, one of the things, some of you know I have a tendency to be anal retentive, so I look at how much paper we use. We tend to print out 10 to 12 pages per tax return. 2 of those pages are their signature pages that authorize us to electronically file for federal and New York State. And my paper usage is not up as much as I expected yet. But essentially, the 1040 now has 6 separate schedules, and I show them here as well.
They did say they make it easier to file, not easier to fill out.
Well, and it actually hasn't affected us much on the filling out part because we use entry screens. So it's still the same data, and it's really the software that routes that to the different forms. So we don't really get hit that much with it. So this was, those that have done any of your own taxes and or even if you've used somebody, this is very familiar. Right, that's the old 1040, double-sided, 8.5 by 11. And while there have been minor changes to it, this really hasn't changed much over the last 15, 20 years. A few things here and there, lines added, but hasn't changed that much. Here's the new improved one, right? Now, obviously you'd say, well, yeah, that's a lot cleaner. There's a lot less there. You can't read the fine print. but there's a lot of places where it says see Schedule 1, see Schedule 2. And then when he goes on, these are the new schedules. All of the stuff you see on these 6 schedules were on the old 1040. So this is the improvement that it's made all the way up through even Schedule 6, which has to do with a foreign address and third-party designee, if you wanted that. That used to be at the very bottom of page 2 on your old 1040. Needless to say, that's one that we will probably never print out. So every year, let's face it, right? Every year brings changes. It brings some challenges with it. If you're low to medium income and you have a straightforward return, look around you, and I do get here to a link you can use to identify AARP tax aid sites. Some of them are very tough to get into. As an example, in Gates, frequently they have their entire season filled before they prepare the first tax return. Depending on the town, they'll start taking the appointments anywhere from the beginning of December into middle of January. It depends on the sites as to when they start taking them. But obviously a very popular one, but straightforward. It's free tax preparation. We're volunteers, so we're protected by the, all of a sudden it left me, Good Samaritan law. Basically, we've been trained for a certain range of tax returns. As an example, if you come in with a business that carries inventory, that's out of scope. If it's a straightforward business, it's just a cash business, there's no inventory at the end of the year, carryover, that's generally in scope. So there are things that are out of scope and in. If it's, as long as it's in scope, we're protected by the Good Samaritan law. And part of what everybody signs is not only do they sign authorizing us to electronically file, but they sign accepting that they are responsible for the return. We're volunteers, we've helped prepare it, we're trained. Obviously, if somebody gets a letter back, I know with all my sites, the town knows how to contact me, and we go take a look at it. If we made a mistake, or even if it was one on their part, they missed a form, we'll do amended returns, and we make sure we take care of them. But ultimately, legally, we're not CPAs. So we've helped them prepare those returns. These are, so here's AARP.org. If you just go do a Google search for AARP tax aid site, AARP tax aid, within a link or two it'll take you, and you can see all these red spots here are the AARP tax aid sites that are available in the Rochester area. It turns out that the way this one came up, 2 of the sites I work at, our first couple that are listed here, probably because of my own zip code. One is in Spencerport, one in Riga, which is actually the town of Riga and the village of Churchville, and then also in Chilai. So these are available, as I said, across the country. We have a lot here in the area. When it comes to the tax changes, if you've been doing them, again, you're not going to see a huge change. There are places, and especially if you use tax software, and I think I list a couple on the next slide. Right, yeah, there was a previous one. TaxCut, TurboTax are a couple of the big ones that are out there. I've used TaxCut since, I think I started using it in '87 when it was Macintax.
Yep.
And then finally TurboTax bought them out. They've been a good company to deal with. The software has worked well. I know people that also love TaxCut. I think both of these, my personal experience with the TurboTax, even if you say, boy, I don't know anything about taxes, if you use TurboTax and you put it in interview mode, I'll tell you what, you're not going to miss anything. It asks you a lot of questions. Now, as Rick said, you may not know how to answer some of them, but it asks you a lot of questions to make sure you're not missing any deductions, that you're not missing income, that it's being properly reported. If you are more familiar with it, basically you click a button that says, I'm just going to enter it myself, and you can just go down through and cherry pick the items that you're entering and go through it pretty quick. But all of those are helpful. The software, there are also options for free online filing. I think several companies have those, and I think New York State also has one. You can go to the New York State tax website, and they have something there. Again, it depends on how simple your return is and how much help you need in terms of filling some of that out. So that's an overview of both the organization and some of the tax changes. Any questions or anything else I can help with? Yeah.
Before the serious of all people get to sidetrack here.
Yep.